Well, friends, the impeachment Titanic has sailed. Today, the House Democrats have unveiled the two articles of impeachment they plan to vote on to charge President Trump with in this circus that they've been engaged in really for the last 3 years or more. So it looks like it may be coming to a head. So let's take a few minutes and we'll analyze this and put it into common sense and cut through all the crap, the haze, the bull, all that nonsense that's going on. First of all, the timetable on this is most probably going to be, from what I'm seeing so far, either later this week or next week, there will be a vote in the full House on these articles of impeachment. The House will have to vote if they follow the rules. Now, who knows with Pelosi and her crew if there are going to be any rules. But if they follow the rules, the House would have to vote on each of the articles of impeachment. They can't be voted on as a group. The way the Constitution describes the procedure, the Democrats will need 218 votes to approve those articles of impeachment and send them to the Senate for a trial to decide whether or not the president gets removed from office. That's the constitutional procedure. The Democrats don't need all of their members to vote for this because I think they have 230 some members in the House right now. So they can allow some to not vote for it if they're worried that they're in districts where they could lose because President Trump won there 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, I should say. So that'll be some political cover they'll try to create for some of the most vulnerable Democrats, and then they'll all come out in their re-election campaign commercials saying, well, I disagreed with the leadership and I voted against it, blah, blah, blah. That's the way the game is played. Now, one thing that we don't know at this point, at least as I'm looking at the news today so far, and this is Tuesday, December 10th. Speaker Pelosi will not call for a vote unless she's sure she has 218 votes, because she doesn't want that embarrassment that would all but assure that by next year they'd remove her as Speaker because of her incompetence. You know, it's the shark smelling blood in the water. If she can't pull this off, the base and everybody else and the radical kooks in the Democrat Party are going to throw her overboard. So if she thinks she has 218 votes, the vote will be called for. It will not be in question at that point. Yes, we'll watch them go through it. And it is possible that maybe one or the other of the two articles might not be approved. I mean, if I remember correctly, the Clinton impeachment, the House put forth 4 articles of impeachment, and I think, was it 2 or 3 that made it to the Senate? I can't remember. It's been a while ago. But so that's possible too. But let's backtrack a little bit where we are here. Since the last report, we talked about this impeachment circus. All right, Adam Schiff's committee, the Intelligence Committee, finished their work and their nonsense, sent it to the Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Gerald Nadler of New York. He's a long-term Trump critic. He's a fat cat liberal from New York State, and he's also pretty incompetent. And if you watched any of the 2 hearings that he held in his committee, you could see that incompetence on parade. I mean, the Republicans twisted him around inside, upside down, and sideways. He banged that gavel more than anybody ever had to in any committee because he couldn't make any logical arguments against their objections, so he just gavelled them down and said, I'm the boss, we're going to do it my way, which is what was expected. Now, the first of the 2 hearings was set up to bring in 4 constitutional law experts to talk about a basis for impeachment. Now, keep in mind, none of these 4 had any evidence to present to show that Trump actually committed crimes. They offered opinions. They pontificated, as academic elitists often do about why this was necessary. However, even though all 4 of them are Democrats, none of whom voted for Trump, there was one Jonathan Turley from Georgetown, who argued against impeachment. He was at least an honest liberal in this regard, that they didn't have a basis for what they did, that they were rushing it, that they did not follow the procedures of requiring that the Trump administration cooperate with them by going to the Supreme Court and having a decision ruled by the Supreme Court. They didn't do any of that, and Turley brought all that out. By the way, he's received many death threats since his testimony. This is the left in action. It's the old Soviet Union reincarnated here in the American Democrat Party of 2019. There is no opposition, and those who oppose the party line disappear in the night. That's how they operate. That's how communists always operate. So after the first set of hearings, it didn't go well. The Republicans pressed the constitutional scholars, quote unquote, to admit that they had no firsthand knowledge of any wrongdoing that Trump did. They could offer no fact evidence to the case. And they also pointed out that, these guys have a long history of Democrat partisanship. They were not objective scholars, dispassionate experts. They were Democrat hacks is what they were, some of whom made huge contributions to Democrat candidates, including Hillary Clinton. So none of what they said, none of the three, what they said was relevant at all, because it was all just political horse manure. Turley at least gave a rational argument that they, of course, rejected. So the next thing that was set to happen is, are we going to have any of the witnesses that were presented in Schiff's committee? Was Schiff going to come and offer a defense for what his committee did? Were the Republicans finally going to be able to call their own witnesses? Well, of course, you know the answer to that. No, no, and more no. Because this is a kangaroo court. It was rigged from the very beginning. They were not going to allow the Republicans or the president and his people any constitutional rights in this charade. That's the absolute truth. So the second hearing turned out to be the report that Schiff presented out of his committee was officially brought to the Judiciary Committee, and lawyers for both sides would make their arguments for or against the conclusions of the Schiff Committee. So you had lawyers who were there to testify, not any of the actual people on the committee. None of the Democrats were there. Schiff hid in his bunker somewhere, because the last thing he wants is accountability given his dubious history. And no other members of the Democrat Party who were on that committee sat as witnesses. There were two lawyers that presented for the Democrats and one lawyer that presented for the Republicans. And oh, by the way, both of those lawyers for the Democrats are not dispassionate legal experts. They're Democrat hacks who the Republicans rightfully pointed out have given hundreds of thousands of dollars to Democrat candidates, and who've even tweeted negative comments about the president. So in any court of law, they would be dismissed as witnesses because there's an obvious bias there, or they would certainly be weakened as witnesses to show that they're not dispassionate, objective observers. But Nadler and Pelosi don't care about that. They have their narrative all made up. In fact, Pelosi even ordered the Democrats to draft the articles of impeachment before this second hearing. Now, another thing that was not followed with the rules of the House that would have had at least a slight modicum of fairness is that there's supposed to be, with this kind of committee hearing structure, after the majority party presents its evidence, that the minority party, in this case the Republicans, gets an opportunity to have their own day of hearings. It's required, but once again, Nadler threw the rules into the garbage can, just as Pelosi did. They both spit on the Constitution through this because they have their narrative all set. And what happened was the committee ended their circus yesterday, and there will probably be no more hearings now that the articles of impeachment have been drafted and disclosed to the public. So, due process, constitutional rights, all are things that the Democrat Party in 2019 no longer believe in. They are no longer Americans who respect our rights in the Constitution. And as I've said before, if they can do this to the most powerful man in the country, they can do it to every single one of us. And that's why they absolutely must be completely stopped, or none of our rights are safe. None of us can hope for any justice in this country. It will be mob rule. And sadly, most of the people in mainstream media are too stupid or jaded to see the dangers here. One of the other things that Schiff did in his slimy report, in his slimy efforts, is he subpoenaed phone records and made public phone records from Rudy Giuliani, the president's private lawyer, which violates attorney-client privilege, one of the most sacred legal things if you talk to any lawyer or you go into any kind of court case, but that didn't matter to Schiff or Pelosi. They don't care about the law. Second of all, they released the minority chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Republican Devin Nunes' phone records. Again, it was a way to shame him. It was a way to try to cast aspersions on him. And what's even more chilling, and I don't know why, well, I know why, but I can't imagine why the national press isn't screaming bloody murder at this. Schiff also released the phone records of a reporter by the name of John Solomon, who's been working to uncover the corruption in Ukraine. So that means that the First Amendment rights of the press have been spit on by the Democrats, by Adam Schiff and his committee too. And again, if these fools in CNN and MSNBC and Time Magazine and the Washington Post don't realize that they could equally be trashed by somebody in government who doesn't respect the Constitution, and their job made a mockery, even worse than it already is, then they're stupid and they're foolish, because without a free press, you have no free society. And, obviously they don't care. They just want to be Pravda, the old Soviet Union propaganda agency that pretended to be the press in the Soviet Union. So at any rate, all of that came out. And now the end result is, well, the Titanic has sailed on impeachment. The two articles will be dealt with. Now, what happens from here on out? They will, when Pelosi knows she has the votes, they will have a vote in the House. When one or both of these articles of impeachment are approved by the House, and again, it's just a basic, simple 51% majority. It doesn't have to be a supermajority to get the impeachment approved by the House. Then they'll be sent to the Senate, and then it's up to the Senate to deal with it, either to set up a trial or to do whatever they're going to do. Lindsey Graham has hinted around a bit about just dispatching it because it's not relevant. One of Graham's basic arguments is that these are not legitimate because you cannot have anonymous witnesses produce testimony and use that as a basis for conviction in American law. If you're going to be a witness in a trial, whether it's civil or legal, you must publicly come forward and give your testimony. You must everyone has the right to face their accuser. Again, it's only the old Soviet Union and other communist countries where anonymous witnesses have convicted people of things, testified against and helped to convict people of things. So one of the things Graham has said is that, look, the whistleblower would have to testify before we'll even consider these articles of impeachment. Whether he'll keep his word on that or how it will play out, who knows. But that's basic to American law. And again, it comes down to our rights here, folks. Whether you like Trump or not, our rights. If we are setting a precedent here in Congress that an anonymous person can make a charge against us and have that be a basis for a prosecution or even a civil judgment against us, then we have no rights. because we'd never know if it was a real accusation or something made up or a lie that somebody made. Every witness has to be cross-examined by the defense in our courts. The prosecution can put out their witnesses, give the evidence they have, and then it's up to the defense lawyers to knock holes in that, to ask questions that knock holes in that defense, so that the jury can see whether or not they are a legitimate witness, whether they're a truthful witness, whether they really witnessed anything worthy of a crime. But again, the Democrats don't care about that when it comes to Trump, and they certainly don't care about that with us. They want us to be slaves in this country. They are the elite. They want to run the show, and we should just go to work, pay taxes, shut up, and do whatever we're told. That's their mindset. That's their attitude. Now, let me just say a couple things. I want to talk about the two articles of impeachment in just a minute here, but let me say a couple things about Nancy Pelosi and how silly she's looked on TV. She's become unhinged. I thought she was either stoned out of her mind or jonesing for some kind of a fix in one of her latest press conferences. She looked so lousy. She was slurring her words. She was shaking like, she had Parkinson's or something. Again, it could be a combination of all those, but the truth of the matter is she is caught between a rock and a hard place, and she's even gotten to the point where she's tried to quote the Founding Fathers. And whenever you hear Democrats speak highly of the Founding Fathers, you know they are very weak in their position because they hate the Founding Fathers. Listen to what they're teaching on college campuses about America's founding. They're all dead white men who were slave owners, who oppressed the Native Americans, and who made this illegitimate country. This is what's being taught by the left. So for her to quote them lovingly or admiringly shows just how pathetic her case is. The other thing is she made references to her faith, to her Catholic faith, and how she prays for the president. And when one reporter challenged her on her hatred for Trump, she just about stuck her bony finger up the guy's nose to say, "Don't you dare accuse me of that." And I think she said something like, "Don't you mess with me." It showed how unhinged and how unglued she is. Whenever you see these liberal Democrats quote faith, quote the Bible, quote some kind of absurd manifestation of warped Christianity as their justification, they have nothing else. They have absolutely nothing else with which to operate. So again, what we see is that she's unhinged about all this, and there's a reason for that. Look, the other thing that's going on with Pelosi that you need to understand, a few outlets have started to report this story, but I hope they follow through with it. Part of what Pelosi's doing is trying to shield her son from scrutiny because his hands are just as dirty as Hunter Biden's are when it comes down to Ukraine corruption. See, what's going on here is basically this is a large money laundering operation by the Democrats and others in government, bureaucrats, or maybe some Republicans involved too, who knows. What happens is this. These politicians want extra money. They can't ask foreign governments or even American businesses to give them funds directly because that can be traced and then they'll be accused of bribery or what have you. So, what they do is this. They will promise a foreign government, who's also corrupt, because it takes two to play this game, that they will give them so much in foreign aid. Let's say $100 million, just a figure off the top of my head. As a quid pro quo, that government will funnel a portion of that money back to the family members of these politicians or bureaucrats. They can't give it to them directly because it would show up. But, like Biden did with Hunter, if it goes to the kid or some other relative or some other friend, it's not really traceable, directly involved. And of course, what the Ukraine people were doing in the Obama administration, the corrupt Ukraine regime, Biden had set all this up where Hunter got put on this board and was paid this unbelievable salary. So some of that American aid that went to them funneled back through this corrupt company, Burisma, or they were paying it as payola so that the government would leave them alone. and then the money did come back to the Biden family indirectly. Now, this happens other places. It certainly happened with China and Hunter Biden, because why in the world would China give Hunter Biden's consulting company $1.5 billion when the guy's basically a cokehead? Aside from that, what is egregious about this is it's all of our money that's being used to do this. It's taxpayer money that is going into the foreign aid that's funneling it back into the pockets of the families of the politicians. This is money laundering in a worse fashion than even the mob has ever done. And it must be exposed, and it must be prosecuted. Now, who knows what will still happen with our Attorney General and his Special Prosecutor Durham's case in that regard. I don't know, but this has to be stopped. This is the deep state. This is the professional bureaucrats and politicians stealing from all of us over and above what they already steal from us. So that's part of what's going on with Pelosi. She's trying to hide the fact that she's gotten wealthy through what her family has, because her son has some dealings with Ukraine energy companies that he also has made a lot of money. And they're not alone. There have been two others that have been listed. Some member of John Kerry's family, I think it was his stepson, and somebody connected in Romney's family too. Yes, the Republican Mitt Romney, his hands are dirty in this too. But this needs to be investigated further, and heads need to roll. So at any rate, that's part of the backstory of what's going on with this. Now, let's talk about the two articles of impeachment they did come up with. They are obstruction of Congress and abuse of power. If you don't know what in the world those mean, you're not alone, because they are so vague and so undefined and so not in the Constitution that they can mean whatever the Democrats want it to mean. The Constitution says that the president can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. Among those are treason and bribery. Interestingly, the entire impeachment charade, the circus, has been focused on supposed bribery by the president. Well, they couldn't prove that case, so they didn't try to have an article of impeachment charging the president with bribery, because they had no evidence of it, and they'd look like even bigger fools than they are if they had brought that forth as an article of impeachment. This way, with these two vague, stupid articles, they can pretend that these are terrible things without ever having to give any specifics. It's typical of the way these liberals operate. It's a whisper shadow campaign. The other thing that's connected with that obstruction of Congress is doubly stupid, because we have in the Constitution a separation of powers. There are three different branches to the U.S. government. The president is not subordinate to Congress. The president is not accountable to Congress in that respect. If he breaks the law, then yes, the Congress has the ability to impeach, and the courts, the courts can be brought into it if need be. But simply because they don't agree with his policies, simply because he won't do what they're telling him he should be doing, that isn't obstruction of Congress. That's just the president saying, "Hey, I'm the Article 2 branch of government. You're Article 1. You do your thing, I do mine." And especially when it comes to foreign policy, the Constitution is very clear that the president is primarily charged with affecting our foreign policy, dealing with other nations. Yes, there is some advice and consent that can come from the Senate with that, but there's nothing really that in this charge that is relevant and makes any sense. The reason that the Trump administration would not cooperate with this impeachment was because it was unconstitutional in the way it was pulled together. There were no due process rights. They didn't give the president the right to have an attorney present to hear the testimony, question witnesses. Remember, most of this started in Adam Schiff's secret underground bunker in the basement of the Capitol, where only the members of the committee could hear what was being said, and only he controlled the release of the transcript. So no press was there. Nobody could walk out with notes in their hands and say, "Here's what happened." Only Schiff would selectively leak out of context quotes from various witnesses. And to this point, not all of those transcripts have even been released to the public or even sent on to the House Judiciary Committee for examination. So this is the Soviet Union in operation here. So the president and his people rightfully said, no, you're not going to surrender your powers as the president of the United States to a kangaroo court, to an unconstitutional lynching. And yes, it's no different than, Clarence Thomas talked about the high-tech lynching when they tried to stop him from being a Supreme Court justice. This was the same thing. The fix was in before it even started. And it continues to be that way. So what has to happen now, if there's anything that we can do, if you live in a district with a Democrat member of Congress representing you, get on the phone, call their office, call their local office, even if you have time to send a letter, say, vote no on the articles of impeachment, and let them know exactly why. And tell them that if they vote in favor of impeachment, they can count on you voting against them next November or even next spring in the primaries, if in fact the Democrats put anybody up to run against. I doubt if they will, but it'd be a possibility. So at least in November of 2020, you can get rid of those lousy turncoats who don't respect the Constitution or our rights. And remember, every Democrat who votes for impeachment now is somebody who hates you, hates America, hates the Constitution, and hates our rights and freedoms. That is what is at stake here. And they need to know there will be a cost if they spit in our faces and try to take away our freedoms. Please keep that in mind. We'll do another report after the vote comes in and it heads towards the Senate and see what happens next. But I just wanted to bring you up to speed and cut through all the haze of what's gone on so far. So hang in there. They've shown just how incredibly weak they are with these stupid articles of impeachment, and this whole thing has been nothing more than a circus or the Titanic doomed to hit the iceberg and sink the Democrat Party. So let's hope that they do get sunk quite a bit. Let's hope they lose 50 seats, 70 seats next year in the election. They're not predicting that, but let's hope that happens. Let's make them, these radical liberals who hate the Constitution and our freedoms, let's make them the tiny minority party for decades to come in our government. So I thank you for listening. Please subscribe to our channel, hit the notifications bell, and as I said, maybe these reports will eventually grow into their own YouTube channel. But for right now, I thank you for sharing in this with me. Stay strong, stay free.